Leadership today is taking a major shift. And today we're going to talk about confidence without ego and calm authority, clean ownership, and standards that build trust. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I hope you are as well. Hang in there with us. Well, welcome to Just Human. This is a space where we have honest conversations about what it takes to lead and to build in today's world. We explore the intersection of business and leadership and personal growth. We talk about the practical stuff and the human stuff because success isn't just what you build, it's who you become while you are building it. I am Jay Boykin, and I'm your host. And thank you so much for listening. We are available everywhere that you can get great podcasts, also available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music. We're going to talk today about a leadership problem that nobody really wants to admit out loud. You get a lot of confidence, and sometimes that confidence can be adrenaline dressed up like authority. It works until the pressure stacks up, and then you start to see cracks and defensiveness and over explaining or even silence. But there's a different kind of confidence, and the kind that feels steady even when the room is tense. The kind that can say, hey, that was on me. The kind that can still hold the standard without it turning into a moment of power struggle. And that is what we're going to unpack today. Today's guest is Rachael Edmondson-Clarke, founder of Ellevar and a human performance partner for senior leaders who are really operating under real pressure and constant change. And the amazing thing about Rachel's work is that she blends the biology and the psychology of leadership to help leaders really restore their energy, sharpen their clarity, and to lead with a steady presence. Rachael, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Jay. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I am excited to be here.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I would be remiss if we didn't hear a little bit about your background and how did you get to this place where you are focusing on this area of leadership and human performance?
I really learnt the hard way what high performance can cost. Early on, really, in my career, I was doing well on paper, but behind the scenes, I was exhausted, I was anxious. I really felt like I was carrying the weight of the entire organization on my shoulders. And I stopped respecting my body. I neglected the most important relationship in my life. And eventually I collapsed on my office floor. And the irony is that I'd always, even from a young age at school, been fascinated by what makes people tick. And for all of my adult life, I'd loved exploring personal development and growth. But I had become disconnected from my biology. And in fact, I was doing something that I now see a lot of high performers doing. I was reframing how I felt, and I was pushing through over and over and over again. And that moment forced me to stop. Obviously, I was on the office floor, really to rethink and reset. And I, at that stage, started working with my system, not against it. And since then, and for more than a decade now, that's been my work, helping leaders to perform at that high level sustainably, where they don't lose that. And I know you talk a lot about this in your Just Human philosophy, where they don't lose that connection to themselves in the process.
That's well, I'm glad that you are okay and doing better now. But I want to ask you, you mentioned that you were reframing how you felt. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I would imagine that we've got some listeners that are likely doing the exact same thing. And I want to help them really to recognize what they might be doing.
Yeah, of course. So I had learned a lot about positive psychology, as I'm sure you and many of our listeners will be very aware of. And what I mean by that reframing was, I was convinced that, as I still am to a degree, that I absolutely have control and can direct my emotions to an extent. But the piece that I had forgotten was that actually, long term, what I would call regulation, where, things like sleep, daylight, nature, movement, good nutrition, regular food, spending time with people that you love and care about, all of those things that really restore our energy, our mood, and our capacity to deal with stress. I'd been neglecting all of those things and constantly reframing the stress to say, okay, I decide how I feel. I can do this. I can get through this day. I can decide what this situation means. I can choose where to put my focus, and I just come disconnected from the what was going on inside of me, and really disrespecting that over a prolonged period of time. And it caught up with me. Time out, body said.
And said differently, I mean, I think that there is this belief, Rachel, that as leaders, we just have to suck it up. And all of the things that we have to deal with, we just have to push through it. So I think that it's important for individuals in leadership positions to recognize that they can't ignore these things, right?
No, no, I was often the first one to switch the office lights on in the morning, the last one to switch them off at night. I would maybe, if I was lucky, be walking around the office shoveling some food in my mouth, usually around 2:30, something like that in the afternoon, when I'd been there from 8 o'clock or even 7:30 in the morning. And okay, that was that might sound quite extreme, but even so, it's very easy. We all, I think, to some degree, understand that those things that I just mentioned, things like sleep, good nutrition, daylight, nature, spending time with people who we love and care about, I think we all understand on some level how important those things are. But the reality is that we get into our jobs and our busy working lives, and other things take over. And it's really easy to, although we know that, to neglect it, to stay sat at our desks and be sedentary for a long period of time during a day, and not to be taking some of those regular breaks.
You know, Rachel, we're already pivoting from some of the questions because you said something there that I find fascinating, and you mentioned, things like sleep and making sure that we're eating properly, but also being around other people. So there are many of us, myself included, who I work primarily from home, and in the role that I have, I can go hours upon hours and maybe even days without having to leave my home just because of the technology and the ability to get so much work done that way. Talk to me a little bit about the importance of interacting with other people and how that can help us, because I do find myself at times where it's okay, I need to get out of this house and go and interact with some different individuals.
Sure. And I'm sure I have no doubt you'd be able to share with us your experience of what that does in terms of your mood and your energy and how you feel and then how you operate. We all know, I think, that we have those relationships that fill us up, those people who we can spend time with, those people who maybe we love and care about, or people who we genuinely know that we can trust and that have our backs. And spending time with people like that is critically important. We are social creatures, social beings, and that support is really beneficial to us being able to show up and perform at our best. And one of the things I think we have to be really mindful of, particularly as busy leaders, is that when that pressure piles on, it can be something to watch out for, that we start to maybe disengage from some of those relationships, and we maybe start to pull back because we think either we've not got the time, or they're not something to prioritize. So, the same way as good sleep and nutrition and daylight and nature and movement and all of those things are important, so too are us keeping these good connections, particularly when times are tough, and to watch that you're not starting to disengage from those.
So true. So, Rachel, uh, as you read the news, and I see a lot of articles today that talk about toxic leadership. Help to frame what that looks like, and then how we compare it to a more responsible leadership.
Well, from my perspective and my experience, toxic leadership is it's not just about the style. I suppose it's really about the impact that it has. When leadership's driven by ego and fear and short-term wins, and people or long-term outcomes become secondary, I think that for me is where that type of leadership's not sustainable over the longer term, and a more responsible leadership's more grounded, and it's more aware of that ripple effect. And it's not just did we win, but actually how did we win, and what did that cost, or actually how did that benefit, because I think the way that you lead always leaves a trace.
Yeah, I am reminded of some leaders that I've had the opportunity to work with in the past, who were they were effective at what they did, but thinking about what you just said, they were not necessarily thinking about how did we win, and what was the cost. And so I think that that is very important, that those things matter, that it can't be, you know, shareholder value at any cost. It can't be winning this big contract at any cost. That there has to be a balance there, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely, and I think it's Simon Sinek. You'll perhaps correct me. That talks about how do we the game here is not how do we win at any cost, but how do we stay in the game. And I know that this will sit with you as well. For me, I think about, well, how do we all stay in the game? When I say that, I mean from a human and planetary perspective. How do we make sure that we can protect our futures and build families, communities, organizations, and a world where that is we can stay in the game.
because people still matter. That the human side of things, that still matters, and I hope that that never goes away. And so, Rachel, when we think about, I mentioned something at the beginning that's talking about confidence without ego. Uh, Explain your thoughts on that expression, the confidence without ego.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because this often comes up for me with a lot of clients that I work with. They want greater confidence. And, I often start by sort of, well, where do you think the confidence comes from? And what are the qualities that enable you to build that feeling of confidence? And often they will come from, of course, confidence will come from experience, from doing the thing. It's interesting. My youngest son, he's 7, and a friend of his came over at the weekend, and he came with one of those hoverboards. That I don't know if you've seen those.
I've actually ridden one before.
Oh, well, you may have done better than me. But I have to confess, Jay, that I was keen to have a go. The kids did get some time with it, I promise, but I was keen to have a go. And the reality is, the first time I was going to have a go on this hoverboard, my confidence was going to be pretty low.
Right.
And I did need someone to stabilize me, hold on to me as I kind of got the hang of it and got going. And so where does that confidence come from? It comes from that competence, it comes from that experience, it comes from trusting ourselves, and importantly, I think it comes from having the courage to act without necessarily having that experience or knowing it all or knowing all of the answers. And I think the ego part that you were talking about, I think that shows up when we feel we really need to protect something, whether that's our image, our status, our sense of control. And I think where sort of truly confident leaders come into their own is where they feel they don't need to protect, but actually they can stay curious and they can stay open.
Rachel, this reminds me of one of the greatest leadership failures that I had in my personal career, but it's something that I kept with me because I continued to allow that to keep me grounded. But my first um, leadership position that I was assigned when I was early in my career, I was in my mid 20s, and I was given this managerial position, and I was responsible for a team of 12 people, and I thought that I knew everything. And I also thought that I had to have all the answers. Um, and I was I had the ego, and it turned out to be an epic failure early on in my career. But the thing that I learned is that as leaders, no matter what level we're at in our careers, as leaders, we can't and shouldn't be expected to know everything. That we can lean on the individuals who are actually closer to the work, and that it's not weakness if we don't have all the answers.
No, I love that. And so a lot of the CEOs and senior execs that I work with, I will encourage, and many of them do this naturally as well, but from a point of view of they're the ones asking the questions, coming from that space of curiosity and asking others what they think and only really coming in with their point of view once they've heard all of that from the rest of the team or the organization. And I think I think to there is absolutely a place to be able to say, I'm not sure about this yet. And that level of openness and vulnerability in some situations, in some cases, is still absolutely fine.
Absolutely. And I love what you mentioned there. I think that there are many leaders that I have seen that I've had the opportunity to work with who in that meeting, in that room, they might state their opinion first
Yes,
and then wonder why there's silence in the room because I think that there is that apprehension, a natural apprehension to challenge that. And what I learned is that some of the best leaders and some of the this is something that I try to do is to seek the input of others first before I give my opinion. And I also found myself where my opinion would change as I'm hearing the thoughts and the opinions of others.
absolutely. Absolutely. And it comes back, I think, to what we were saying before. It's this ability to stay open and be curious and yeah, to not believe that you know it all, albeit you will, no doubt you will be in that position because of immense experience and success. But the world is changing so quickly at the moment. So I think, and it's really challenging, I think, for leaders, because the game is constantly changing and evolving very rapidly, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's technological changes, whether it's environmental stuff that's going. There's a lot of stuff. That's before we even get into internal pressures and challenges within an organization. That's a lot. It's a lot for any of us to be dealing with, and to think that we know it all or that we've got all of the answers, that I just do not think that is realistic. But can we show up and lead our people well? Absolutely, we can still do that.
Yes, and leading from a place of curiosity. I love that you mentioned that. So, Rachel, I'm curious. So often you will hear people talk about executive presence or leadership presence. What does that look like today? I feel like that has changed, or at least it should be. What does that real presence look like in a leader?
Hmm. Um, for me, it's something that you can feel straight away, and it's about being and feeling seen and heard and understood. And there's no rush, there's no performance. It's just full attention, me with you in this moment. And I think in what is now it can be a very distracted world, that level of presence really, really stands out. I had a lovely situation a couple of weeks ago. I joined a colleague on a call over Zoom, and she asked me, oh, how am I doing? And I was like, do you know what? Do you know what? Whew, it's been a bit of a full on day. And we were due to catch up. And she said to me, she said, look, would it help if we rescheduled? And I think she could see the utter relief, my shoulders drop. And, and there was a couple of things for me. She noticed me in that moment. And I think it's important to recognize that that was over a camera and not even in a room together, but she noticed me in that moment. And then she gifted me something that was really, really exceptionally valuable to me at that point in time. We took 5 minutes, we rescheduled, and then I was able to show up in a way that meant I could be fully present with her again, but she was fully present with me. And I think there was a couple of things going on there. Not only was she able to gift me that, but and it was only a second, but there was this split second where I was like, yes, receive this, Rachel. And I think as leaders, sometimes you said it before, that we believe that we have to have all of the answers and that we just have to take it all on. And actually it's okay to receive sometimes too. I know for some of us it doesn't come very often, but being able to accept and being able to receive as well as give, I think it's important.
That is an amazing story. And um, I was having a conversation with a group yesterday and talking about being fully present because, again, all of there's a lot of data out there that talks about how disengaged workers are in many instances in the workplace, but just the the power of being fully present and paying attention to those type of things and recognizing, much like that individual did for you, that you were having a challenging time, that can be a huge gift and a huge sign of a strong leader, don't you think?
Yeah, hugely, hugely so. And if I may, Jay, you said at the top of this that you feel like presence and what that is has changed. So and should have changed. So what's the shift that you see? I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that shift and the change.
That's that. Thank you for that question. The thing that I'm seeing is more of a focus on the how we do things, the why we are doing things. I believe that the leadership position of um, here's what we need to go do, just go do it, is is changing, and being in a space where we can take in the ideas and the perspectives and the experiences of all of the people in the room, including the quiet person who's in the room, as opposed to only hearing from the loudest person or the person with the most seniority. I think that being able um, to invite everyone who's at that table, everyone who is in that room, to feel the psychological safety to be able to speak up, to be able to say that they disagree with the groupthink that's going on, to say that they don't understand, to say that they disagree without actually putting a target on their back. That is the type of leadership where you get people to actually lean in and buy in. And I think that the strength that you get from a team like that is much more powerful than that top down, more dictatorial type leadership. That's some of the shift that I'm seeing, and more of the direction that I'm seeing.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting because I've worked for several years now with a guy called Chris Beatty. He's professor of evolutionary anthropology, cognition, and neuroscience at Oxford and Kent universities here in the UK. And one of the things that he's been studying for 20 plus years now is this relationship between mood, emotion, and sustainable high performance. And one of the things that he talks about is around our our emotional, he calls it our emotional ecosystems. So if what we were talking about at the beginning of the show was sleep, nutrition, daylight, kind of our own personal ecosystems, with the exception of the social piece that we were talking about, essentially the stuff that's going on inside of our skin. But we don't operate in these vacuums where it's just us. We've got a whole external world of things and people that are out there. And he talks about five social needs that we all have as human beings. And if any one or multiple of those needs are triggered at any point in time, we're going to feel emotional dysregulation. And what you were just saying then was about inviting everyone. And one of those fundamental social needs that we all have as human beings is to feel included. And so, where I'm sorry, maybe slightly, but where I'm tying this back into is, if as leaders we are meeting those fundamental social needs that we all have as human beings, including that need for inclusion, if we're meeting those and we're not triggering those, then we're going to build cultures and teams and performance that is going to be sustainable and high trust and psychologically safe.
That is so good. And I'm going to get some information after the show about, I want to read more about the work that he has been doing. Do you feel uh, psychological safety? Sometimes you will hear that phrase and you will hear it sometimes be attacked almost in the sense of coddling.
Mm-hmm.
How important is psychological safety in the workplace, especially?
I feel that it's critical to high performance, because without that safety, we want people to be creative, to bring their best ideas, to be willing to challenge, to potentially fail as well. And if they don't feel safe to do that, or to have those candid conversations with one another, then that's not a situation where people are able to perform at their best. I do accept that there are certain situations whereby different styles and types of leadership where there may be less psychological safety are appropriate, but I think generally in the business workplace they are, few and far between.
Absolutely. And I think that if we're in a situation where um, there's a safety issue where lives may be at stake, you probably have less time
Yes.
to really take in the entire room, and you may not have the opportunity to create in that moment all of the psychological safety that you can in your average business boardroom. But in most instances, as you alluded to, I think that having that space, creating that space where individuals feel like they can um, show up. It's not just okay for someone to have a great idea. If they don't feel like they can express that idea, then that idea is likely not going to go anywhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, it comes back to, if you don't feel safe, then you're potentially in protection mode again. And if you're in protection mode, your energy is not going to be out here. It's going to be, you're going to, you're going to be tightening, you're going to be holding on. And actually, we want people to be putting themselves and their best foot and their best creativity and ideas forward. So being able to being able to create environments where people do feel those things, and I come back to these, these fundamental social needs that we have as human beings. What can we do as leaders to make sure that people feel included, that they feel as though they are valued and that they belong, that they have certainty and clarity around what they're doing, that um, they feel like they're equally and fairly treated. These are all really important fundamental human needs, and when we meet those, we naturally, a natural byproduct of us meeting those is that we will have cultures that feel psychologically safe and help people to perform at their best.
Rachel, when we have a team that is performing at their best, when you've got high performers, when you've got a high standard, how do you hold a level of accountability? How do you maintain that high standard and try to maintain the relationship?
Mm. This is such a good question. Do you know, I see so many leaders get caught in this. Either they lower the standard to protect the relationship, or they push the standard and end up damaging it. And I think the balance sits in the trust, and the trust tends to rest on three things. And I come back to the trust triangle here. Francis Frey, I think, if I'm recalling this correctly, that's about authenticity, it's about logic, and it's also about being able to have empathy. And so I guess when I'm holding a high standard, I want people to feel that I'm being real and what I'm saying makes sense, and that I genuinely care about them. And if you are doing that in such a way that meets those social needs that we've been talking about as well, when that's consistently met, that trust builds. And then I think you can challenge directly without breaking the relationship. But it's also, of course, about having good rapport as well with people when you're doing those things as well.
Rachel, what's your opinion on emotional intelligence, and where do you feel that comes into play in leadership?
I think it's huge. And I think it starts with us being more emotionally aware of our own feelings and emotions. And one of the things that I have really, really thoroughly enjoyed in my own journey, and what I work enormously with now with my clients, is them having a better understanding that our feelings are really useful signals, far from being something that needs to be suppressed or squashed or ignored. Feelings are like, like a car dashboard. They're signals letting us know that, something needs attention. And for me, one of the greatest questions that we can ask ourselves as leaders is, when we recognize something feels off, maybe we're slightly frustrated or stressed, or, you know, feeling deflated, or whatever it is, we recognize something doesn't feel good. Where is that signal coming from? And how much of that signal is down to the things that we were talking about at the beginning of the show? The stuff your grandma would tell you. Have you eaten? Have you slept well? Have you had movement, daylight, nature? All of that stuff, good social connection. How much of it is because you are just under restored in that area? And how much of it is because something or someone has triggered you? And that's, it's triggered, it will have triggered one of your five social needs that we've been talking about. So how much of how you are feeling is, and of course those two things they interrelate, and one has an impact on the other, absolutely. But when you can ask yourself, like, what is this signal? And you can then, the next intuitive question is, what do I do about it? And we want to try to restore our mood, all that stuff that's inside of our skin. How are we integrating that into our leadership practices? And how do we resolve that, that issue, that thing, or have a conversation if it's someone that's triggered us? How do we try to resolve that? And that really brings us back to that equilibrium within our bodies, where we're able to respond and perform at our best. I think so often with leaders, and particularly in leadership, we can talk a lot about leadership capability, and it's really important, absolutely. But what I think is missing so often is we don't talk about capacity to lead well. And what I'm talking about here is leaders becoming better aware of their own capacity and how they are making sure that they are regularly restoring and recognizing how they are feeling so that they have the capacity to meet the demands, because there are a lot of demands on leaders today.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you what I think is going to be a very rhetorical question. We've we've heard the expression many times that certain individuals are just they're born leaders. Do you feel that the capacity to lead, the ability to lead is something that you just have or something that you can truly develop over time?
This is a great question. I think that there are people that do naturally, it comes to them easier than others, but there's so much skill involved in leadership. You talk about this, that connection that you have with yourself is an ever ongoing journey, and then how we learn to better connect with others, I think, is an ongoing journey. And so uh, yeah, will anyone or any one of us ever know it all? No, we won't, and there will always be skills to learn. But do some people seem to be perhaps a little bit more naturally disposed to it? Perhaps.
Thank you for that. We are talking to Rachael Edmondson-Clarke, and we're talking about leadership, a very powerful conversation around leadership. Rachel, you mentioned when you were giving us your background and your story that you literally ended up on the floor, that you were neglecting your internal dashboard, and probably there were many warning signs that you were ignoring until you literally ended up on the floor. As you're working with the leaders that you're working with today, what are some of the warning signs that could be on their dashboard that they need to not ignore so as not to end up on the floor the way that you did?
Well, there's a number of things. So if you find yourself regulating and reframing, as I was over a long bit, we know now that it's clinically predictive of certain risks and outcomes, and some of those risks are a decrease in cognitive performance. So you might find yourself more easily confused, not being able to make sense of things. We find that we find leaders who will have an increase in negative bias, so they might feel more threatened. So if you're feeling that way, that could also be another sign and another signal. We talked before about disengagement, when we talked about disengaging from other people or things that we know, that people that we love and care about. So, but that's also true in a work sense as well. So you might find yourself starting so quietly disengaging from things. That's another signal. Um, just your work performance not being exactly as good as maybe that it could be. And the other thing that regularly comes up as well is you may start to notice, whether you're aware of it or not, but just being less empathetic to others as well. So along with all of the things that we've spoken about before, you may find yourself not eating well or regularly. You may find yourself in cycles like needing a wine or a beer to chill out at the end of the day and coffees to get you going. So I mean, that may seem relatively mild, but we do then get outcomes like poor physical and mental health and substance abuse. It might sound quite a strong word, but people are relying on other things to be able to function and perform. And ultimately, that can lead to burnout, as it did in my case, and people leaving, departing from organizations. And those are things that are clinically predictive. If you are, for any prolonged period of time, not restoring yourself, or you're not resolving some of the emotional conflicts that are there, you stay in that environment for a prolonged period of time, it is going to have those outcomes and those risks attached to it.
Rachel, what does I'm going off script a little bit. What does rest, what does recreation look like for you today?
Mm. I love that. So, rest and recreate. This morning, I went to my children's music recital, which was just absolutely gorgeous. I'm very lucky that I get to have the flexibility in my work that allows me to, integrate just as I would like it. So I have a PT session 3 times a week. That time is fiercely protected. On a quarterly basis, I go and I see a lady and I have a facial Reiki massage, and that's like a ritual that I have every change of the season, which I always look forward to. Of course, I do things annually, and I think, I suppose the nice thing here, and that might prompt listeners, is to think about what are the habits, the routines, the rituals that you have for rest and restoration on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly, seasonal basis, and also what are those kind of adventure things that you want to plan in and be doing once a year. So this whole idea that we can actually, kind of take that step back, think about, I book these things. This is how I operate, and I know we're not all the same, but I book those things in, I have them scheduled, and then I fiercely protect them.
That's so good. And you talk about uh, fiercely protecting these things. These are boundaries. These are part of your boundaries that you have established as you're working with the leaders that you work with. Are there some particular practices you that you might encourage them so that they can become more in tune to themselves, whether it is journaling, meditation? Are there some micro practices that you recommend to help leaders to really get in tune with themselves?
Mm. I'm going to come back to that question that I said before, because I think that being tuned into and being able to recognize something feels a bit off here. I'm noticing that I've got, and because the crazy thing is that sometimes we are the last people to realize that we're in a mood. So, perfect example. I said I've got young kids, and it has been the case before where I've woken up in the morning, and the first time I've realized that I've got an under restored mood is when I snapped at them for something that the morning before I would have laughed at them. And it's because I've had maybe a lack of sleep that night or whatever it is. So, I think really being able to build this awareness and being able to put some space between the things that, the stimulus and our response, and recognizing then that in that space between anything that's triggered us, or that's something that's happened, that in that space we have the freedom to choose who we want to show up and be. And freedom to choose happens moment to moment to moment. Every single day, we get that opportunity to choose how we want to show up and the leaders that we want to be of ourselves and of others. So build that awareness and that recognition of your ability to tune in and to choose.
You know, Rachel, you said something that was so insightful, and it made me think of, you know, as human beings, um, it's hardwired into us to have these moments of amygdala hijack where we go into that fight, uh,
Flight.
freeze
Yeah.
or flee type
Yeah.
of a mentality. You know, it kept our ancestors alive out in the wild, but it's still part of our brains. It's part of who we are as human beings. And so often you will see situations where an individual is triggered, some feeling, emotion is triggered, and we have that brief moment of amygdala hijack, and we will react as opposed to taking a moment to really check in with ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
understand that yes, I'm feeling this way. Why am I feeling this way? You know, this person isn't really, you know, they may have been the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, but that 10 to 15 seconds of pause can be a huge difference between a horrible reaction and a mature response, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not easy. And if you are under restore, this I keep coming back. It's not intentional, I promise. But like, if you are under restored in those things that we talked about at the beginning, it takes a lot of energy to be able to override the lizard brain with the executive brain at the front here, very simply talking about things. That takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort. And so if you are under restored in sleep, movement, daylight, good nutrition, all of those things that we've been talking about, is going to be so much harder for you to be able to respond in that mature way. It will take so much more energy, which is why, and I come back to, my story and me being on the floor. It's why not ignoring the biology and integrating restoration practices into our daily, weekly, monthly, annually cycles is so important. So important. You can do it, and it's like a muscle, you can train it. Just like going to the gym and lifting those weights, you can practice. And I would encourage leaders to practice on the really small things. Silly example, really silly example. I noticed myself getting agitated and annoyed brushing my teeth the other morning when my electric toothbrush ran out of battery. Body went all tense, it got really kind of cross. And then I realized what I was doing. I let go of all of that tension and I just went, hang on a minute, this is silly. I pulled the toothbrush out with the head still in my mouth. And I realized that my husband also has one. He's a bit more organized than me, so his was charged up. And I swapped it. Silly, silly little example. But those kind of examples are available to all of us all the time. And we can train ourselves with these, like, what seemingly, silly or insignificant things. And then when we need to do the serious bench press, when we're in that meeting and somebody says something, we've trained ourselves to be much better and quicker at being able to spot what could be an immediate reaction and put some space between that. And it doesn't even have to be a lot. Like, you can train yourself to do, like, it can be in a breath and everything can change.
I
But
I sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I love
no,
the
no, no,
example of
no.
the
I just
toothbrush. I love that example. You made me think of another question, and one of the things that I tend to close out each episode with is making the comment to my listeners to be kind to yourself. And it's so funny because there are times that I can be the worst to myself. I will give others way more grace than I give myself. As you work with leaders, Rachel, I know that they are under enormous pressures, whether they are running large corporations, um, smaller businesses, nonprofit organizations, research teams, whatever the case may be. Uh, Leaders are so often under a lot of pressure. Is part of the self-care that we need to think about is the storylines that are playing in our own heads, that we need to really give ourselves the same type of grace that we would show to another human being.
Absolutely. I often talk about, you know, the work that I do in, there's the state, the emotional state. We've been talking lots about that. The story. What are the stories? What are the beliefs? What are the things that we are telling ourselves and sharing with others? And the strategies. What are the strategies then that can help? Yes is the answer. And what do we usefully do about that? I had this conversation with a client this morning, and I, we were wrapping things up, having worked together for 6 months, and he'd asked, to kind of recap on some of the principles. And one of those principles was just be your language is so powerful. And what you say to yourself and to other people impacts how you feel. And it also, it's your way of interpreting your life and your life experiences. So if you say, "Oh, my kids are a nightmare," they're going to feel like they're a nightmare versus, "Oh, my kids are acting age appropriately." It's so choosing your words, especially the words that we use with ourselves, is so important. But the other thing I said to him this morning was, it's not just the words that we use. It's how we speak to ourselves, which really, you may have shared this with your listeners before, but just that whole remembering that it's not just what you say, it's how you say it, and that even the voice inside of our head, and we all have them, that you have the DJ decks. Like, imagine you've got the DJ decks with all of the, and you can change those voices, because sometimes that voice is so harsh and it's so damning. Well, what actually if that was a really beautiful, soft, I don't know, fairy godmother voice, or the volume was turned right down, or it was just like a whisper, or it was just speaking to you in the kindest possible way. So remembering, it's, yes, the language is so important, but also how you speak to yourself, and that you do have control. You do have the DJ decks to be able to, play around with that. Make it a funny voice. You make it a sexy voice. Like, actually, you can control that too.
That is so good. Rachel, this has been an amazing conversation. If my listeners wanted to reach out and connect with you, what platforms are you on? What's the best way for them to connect?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. You can get in touch with me on LinkedIn, is the best platform, but I am also on Instagram and Facebook as well. But the best place would be through my website, which is Ellevar, Ellevar.co.uk.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Rachel, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And I feel like we could have continued to have this conversation. And I feel like this isn't going to be the last time that we're going to have you here on the show.
Thank you so much. I have loved it, Jay. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And to my listeners, thank you so much for being here. I know that with so many demands on your time, the fact that you chose to take time out of your day and listen means a lot to me. And I would ask this of you, no matter where you are listening to Just Human, I would love it if you would subscribe, leave me some comments so that we can get better. And if there is someone out there that you think can really use this message, definitely share it with them. And so, again, thank you for joining us on Just Human. Until next time, I want you to remember, be kind to yourself.